हाँ अनिरुद्ध, प्रदीप। Hello, Jeff.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, very good. We were waiting for you actually. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today. Lovely to see you the second time.
Yes, nice to see you
us.
again.
Yes, yes. We are so grateful to you for doing this again with us. And our audience love you, really love you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love you too.
Yes. And shall we start the program, Jeff?
Certainly.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Hello, my dear friends, my dear masters. Hope everyone is doing well. And I welcome you all to this beautiful meeting, to this beautiful event where you are meeting Jeff Carreira, a world-renowned author, my dear friends. And this is Parinitha Patri bringing to you this event. I would like to speak a small, give a small introduction or give a beautiful presentation regarding Jeff Carreira, my dear friends. And I would like to talk about him a little bit so that you know him beforehand. So Jeff Carreira is, he put it simply, he supports people to live spiritually inspired life, free from the constraints of fear, worry, and self-doubt, and aligned with their own deepest sense of meaning and purpose, my dear friends. Life has conditioned all of us to be fearful and self-protective, and some of us eventually feel suffocated by the mental and emotional habits that keep us from living a passionate and spontaneously free life. And we long to be liberated from the invisible ties that seem to bind us. And we know more is possible, and we start searching for a life that matches our true potential. And he was quite young when his own spiritual search began. And at the age of about 7, he began spending time locked in his father's car in his driveway, trying to stop his mind from thinking. And somehow he knew that if he could do that, he would discover something wonderful. And yes, he did discover something wonderful, let me say miraculous. So that is a small introduction about Jeff Carreira, my dear friends. And I cannot wait to invite him to this beautiful stage that he can speak about his new book, The Miracle of Self-Realization, based on the teachings of our greatest master, Ramana Maharshi. So Jeff, please welcome to this event, and I welcome you heartfully with a grateful heart. Thank you so much for coming up.
Oh, thank you so much for a beautiful introduction and for having me join you again today. And it's lovely to speak with you. I think the last time you and I spoke, we were speaking about the meditation practice that I teach called the practice of no problem.
Yes.
And essentially that practice asks you to simply sit and not make a problem out of anything.
Yes.
And no matter what happens, you don't make a problem out of it. So the way that usually goes for people is it's very easy for a few seconds, and then it gets gradually more difficult. And initially what happens is you have certain thoughts and ideas that arise that for some reason you think shouldn't be there, and you make a problem out of those, or you're not having some experience that you think you should be having, and so you make a problem out of that. And then you see yourself in your mind making problems, and you make a problem out of the fact that you're making problems, and you get more and more deeply entrenched in the mind's problem solving mechanisms. And in that practice, as we spoke about already, no matter what happens, even if you see yourself making problems out of everything, you don't make a problem out of that. And so what you discover is that you can always rest in the peace of no problem, in the peace of just acceptance of the way things are. And you and I spoke about that at some length in our last conversation. And what we're going to speak about today is essentially the source of that practice, that discovery, because my formative years were spent in a spiritual community with a teacher who had been a student of Punja, or sometimes known as Papaji, from Lucknow. And Punja was a direct disciple of Ramana Maharshi. And during the years I was part of the ashram and we were doing lots of different practices and study, I was aware that the lineage I was working in traced itself back to Ramana Maharshi. But at least in my experience of that ashram was that we didn't do very much actual study or exploration of Ramana and his teachings. And so it was only after the ashram disbanded and I was teaching on my own, that I went back and started reading, some of the teachings that Ramana's disciples had recorded. And I started to realize how much of what I had learned really was coming directly from Ramana's teaching. And some of the words were different and some of it had been updated. And I realized that the way that I teach the practice of no problem, which I just described, is very, very, it's very much derived from Ramana's practice of, what he spoke of as who am I? So, in that practice, you sit and no matter what happens, you just keep asking the question, who am I? Who is the person? Who is the being having this thought? Who is the being having this feeling? Who is the being? So in the case of a problem, who is the being who thinks it has a problem? Where does the sense of a problem arise from? And so you're always putting your attention back to the source, and that source, to use Ramana's language, is the self absolute. It's the one self. It's the pure awareness, which is the inception and the beginning of the whole universe, of all of existence. It's the one consciousness that is the source of existence. And ultimately, as another great sage, Nisargadatta, famously used as one of his famous book title, I am that. We are all that, ultimately. That the awareness that's here, sitting, speaking with you, and the awareness that's listening in you, we're on opposite sides of the world, but that awareness is one. It's the singular awareness. The one that's speaking is not separate from the one that's listening. The one that's sitting here in Philadelphia in the United States is not separate from the one that's sitting there in India listening, because ultimately we're all vehicles for the one consciousness, which everyone knows. I mean, not everyone, but those of us who are pursuing these kinds of teachings, we've all heard this, and it's not just in Indian teachings, of course. That you find it in Western teachings. The terminology is different. They talk about everyone being a child of God, but essentially they're pointing to the same thing, that we all emerge from the same source, and we hear these things but hearing them and understanding them is very different than having a direct experience of the truth of that. You know, the direct experience of the truth of oneness is shocking. It's and it doesn't matter how much you knew it beforehand. You know, even if you could write books about it beforehand and describe all the various saints and sages and how they described it, and you understood it all, still, even a moment of direct recognition of oneness, it's even if you've had that experience before, you know, every time you have it, there's no way you can be prepared for it. There is no preparation. You know, you always encounter that reality like a newborn baby. You know, like there is no way to not be innocent about the truth. You can be not innocent about the knowledge of the truth. You know, and it's easy to be a know-it-all in that sense, but not when you actually touch it. There's no way to not simply fall to your knees in gratitude for the revelation of it, because it just changes absolutely everything. And so when I started teaching, when the community that I was a part of disbanded and I kind of found myself more on my own, it started to become, it was one of the first things that happened, actually, because I'd been part of a community, and so I had the ashram, the container of those relationships were holding me. And when that disbanded and I was more on my own, almost the first thing that happened was I had a desire to explore the roots of what I had been working with. Like I felt like I needed to connect to the line, to the lineage, because the lineage would hold me. You know, the power of lineage is that it creates a foundation to stand on. And I think in the modern world, I don't know how if this is true in India as it is in America, but certainly in the modern world in America, I think the value and importance of lineage is often overlooked. You know, in America, we like things that are new. And in the spiritual marketplace, most people want to, as you generally do in marketplaces, you want to distinguish what you're doing as being different from everything else, including all the things that came before. And the disservice that does is it disconnects us from the line of power of lineage, because the realization that I have the privilege of teaching from ultimately was Ramana's, not mine. And from Ramana, it was passed on to his disciple and to his disciple and to me. And so that's where it's flowing from. So if you cut that line, you cut the flow of power. That's at least my impression. So I wanted to just start by connecting the last conversation we had about the practice of no problem with this conversation, saying that the practice of no problem is in itself derived from, even though I didn't know that at the time that I was developing it, I was just steeped in Ramana's teaching. So of course, everything that I was teaching was being influenced by that, even if I didn't know it at the time. But now I see how deeply and directly the practice of no problem is a reflection of Ramana's practice of who am I that leads to self-realization.
Yeah. And you have mentioned about the 4 main paths to enlightenment in your book.
Yes.
And can you please, give us a little more detail about that? What are those 4 paths, and how do we approach those 4 paths?
Okay, so I'm I have to, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to, but there's one thing which I think I see right now as three, which is this, the stage of practice, the stage of attainment, and the stage of realization. Is that what you're referring to?
In your book, it is mentioned as that the practice of self-inquiry that Ramana teaches is a path of the Jnana Yoga.
Yes.
And so it says that in the Hindu tradition, it is generally recognized that there are four main paths that lead to enlightenment.
Yes.
That
So
is
Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga. Well,
yeah.
the two main are Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. Those are the two main branches. And then there's Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga. And so those are the four yogas that represent four different paths to realization. So my understanding and, you know, my knowledge of the Eastern tradition is, I'm not a pandit or a scholar for sure, but as I said, Jnana Yoga, which is the path of insight or the path of wisdom, the path of knowledge, you know, not in the information sense, but in the higher sense, and the path of Bhakti, which is the path of love and devotion, are the two main branches. And, you know, Ramana writes beautifully about those two, and he's generally seen as a Jnana Yoga, working in the domain of Jnana Yoga. So that has to do with discovering that deep insight into the source of your true being. And so the Jnana Yoga practices are all about knowledge, discovering self-knowledge, discovering who you really are as the pure awareness that is the source of all of creation. And you have to pursue that, as Ramana says, you know, you pursue that knowledge. He said everything you do in life you do with part of your attention, part of the time. But this you must do with all of your attention, all of the time. This is the supreme knowledge that it takes an intense amount of concentration and effort and energy to discover. So that's the one path. On the other side is the Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga, in Bhakti Yoga, there are practices of love and devotion. That can be to the divine or to God, some form of God itself. It could be to a teacher or a guru. And the idea is that you simply surrender yourself to love, to deep, deep, deep love. And you do practices of surrender. And I've done a little, you know, and it's interesting. I guess this is what I want to say about that. These are two paths, but Ramana makes it clear in his teaching that in the end, they become one. And the reason he says that is he says, in order for the practitioner of Jnana Yoga to pursue that path as far as one needs to pursue it, with the energy one needs to pursue it all the way to the end, you have to be fueled by an intense love for that which you seek. Like only a deep love will ultimately fuel you and inspire you with the energy required to follow that path all the way to the end. And at the same time, in terms of the bhakti, that bhakti yoga ultimately reveals the truth that which you love, that which you are seeking, that which you are surrendering to, is none other than your own true self. So it reveals the wisdom in the end. The place you end up with along either path is the same. You end up intensely in love with the deep source of your own self. And so that was Ramana's opinion, is that those two paths, they take you to the same place in the end. And I found that interesting because definitely my path included both. In fact, if as much as my path had a lot of Ramana's self-realization, you know, who am I practice in it, it was also very bhakti path because it was very much in the context of a teacher and the love of a teacher. And you know, that was a huge part of the fuel. Love of the truth, love of the divine, love of the possibility. That was all always mixed in. In fact, I would almost say that if I had to say one or the other, my path was more a bhakti path than a jnani path. It's hard to know, but that feels true. Now, you mentioned that there are 4 yogas. So then there's karma yoga, which is the yoga of service. So that's the yoga in which you just make yourself, you just do good, you do good deeds, good service in the world. I mean, I guess in a way I see that as, and maybe this is why they say bhakti and jnani are the 2 main divisions, because in a way, karma yoga to me seems like a variation of bhakti yoga, where you're giving, because you know the way Ramana speaks about it is in bhakti yoga, you basically relinquish the I, right? You get rid of you sort of subjugate yourself to the lover, to the beloved. So you get rid of the I. In jnana yoga, you get rid of the me. You get rid of the outside in view of your own identity. You relinquish the identity so that you discover the I-ness, not a picture of yourself, but the source of the self. So in either way, you're giving up the duality of self in order to find oneness at the end. So in some ways, karma yoga feels to me like a variation of bhakti yoga. And then you have Raja yoga. My understanding of that, and this could be wrong, but my understanding of that is that it was Vivekananda that wrote about Raja yoga a century and a half ago. He wrote about all 4 yogas, but he wrote extensively about Raja yoga. And that is the yoga of practice. And I find that one to be interesting. I haven't done a lot of work, but Raja yoga has a lot to do with how you practice and utilize the kind of subtle energies of awakening, and how you can follow that path to oneness, to the final realization. So, you know, those 4 paths, one is the path of wisdom, one is the path of love and devotion, one is the path of service, and one is the path of practice, are often seen as the 4 yogas that lead to awakening.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I lost your
I'm
audio.
sorry. How does one travel from duality to non-duality? What kind of steps do we take to go from this phase to that phase? How do we do that?
Well, okay, so this is where now I'll talk about Ramana's teaching specifically. But in Ramana's teaching of who am I, and this would be congruent, as I said earlier, with the way that I teach the practice of no problem. We are trained to always have our attention on ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean our small self, you know, sometimes known as our ego or our identity. You know, this wonderful and amazing thing that human beings can do, which is a very powerful capacity, is we can represent ourselves to ourselves. So we don't just live, we also have an image of ourselves living. Right? This is what makes us self-conscious. We have an image of ourselves that lives our life. So we don't just live it, you know, without any picture of ourselves doing it. We also have this outside in picture. So as I'm talking to you, I'm also aware that I'm in a body, and I'm aware that my mouth is moving, and I kind of, I could easily imagine myself from the outside. I know that I exist. I know that I'm acting while I'm acting. Now, there are certain amazing states of consciousness that are often called flow states in the West. So flow states are when you're doing something you love, you whatever it is, playing a sport, or of course can happen in spiritual practice as well. But you're doing something that you love, and you get so absorbed in what you're doing that you forget yourself. And this is when can happen reading a book or watching a movie, and these are the times when you're reading and you realize you've been reading for 2 hours and you had no idea, because you were so in the story that you forgot yourself. You forgot that you were reading. Or you watched the movie, and after 10 or 20 minutes you forgot yourself, and then suddenly the movie's over and you're like, oh, where am I? You forget what time it is, you forget what day it is, right? You were gone for a little bit of time. You were kind of gone. You had been absorbed. In a sense, you're getting a little taste of non-duality in those flow states, right? You're getting a little taste of what it's like to live without that constant identity, knowledge of the identity. So in practice, this is where Ramana speaks about practice, attainment, and realization. So in practice, in the practice phase, which can be years, you just get good at, no matter what happens, no matter what arises, you turn your attention back on the self, the big self. You turn your attention back on the awareness that is the source. And at first you're terrible at it, and you're constantly getting lost in thought. And then, and then you remember 10 minutes later, and then you go back, and then you get, and it's exhausting. And the problem with practice is the vast majority of people will give up way too soon, because it's hard. And like anything that's hard, we've got a lot, we're busy people, we don't have time. You start to get a sense that this is not going to be something you just master in a week. It takes a long time, but eventually you'll get good at it. And then you've entered the first phase. You've graduated from phase 1, because now you're good at it. And good at it means that anytime you recognize that your attention has gone on something other than the self, you take it right back. You're good at taking it right back. It doesn't matter how many times that happens. Every time you recognize it, you immediately go back. Now, because now you've kind of mastered that practice. The next stage is if you continue practice. That's not the end. Of all the people that quit before they got there, there's going to be a certain amount that then quit because they figure that that's it. But that's not the end. That's just phase 1. So then phase 2 is you keep going until the action of as soon as you recognize that your attention is on something other than the self, the attention goes back to the self. It becomes a habit. It becomes habitual and automatic. It happens all the time. It's just your natural. You've developed a natural habit that whenever you realize that your attention is on something other than the self, it goes back almost without you having to do anything. That's just so. You start practice. We've all culturally developed a habit of always keeping our attention on something other than ourselves, either our self-image or an object in the world or a thought or a feeling. In fact, when you start teaching people this meditation and you tell them, no matter what you're thinking about or feeling or seeing, or just bring your attention back to its source, they go, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. Like there's no our culture doesn't give people any way of knowing where they could put their attention other than on some object, some external object, some other. And that's the source of duality. Whenever your attention is on some other, an object, a thing, a memory, a thought, a feeling, but it's on something other than you, and then you're aware of yourself, and that's foundational source of duality. Then there's you and the world, and they're separate. As you learn to bring your attention back to the self, and as that becomes a habit that just occurs automatically, that's when you enter into a phase where meditation starts to be easy, finally. Yeah. Up until then, it takes a lot of effort. But when you reach that point, it becomes easy, because as soon as you sit down, that's what naturally happens. You just keep going back and back and back. And in some ways, it can feel like, well, I don't really need to do this anymore, right? If all this is about is mastering the practice, you've kind of mastered it at that point, which is why there's then another temptation to quit, to give up, to go, not in a bad way, but just to assume you've gone as far as you can go. And so there's no reason to do it anymore. But if you don't, if you stick with it, see, and this is where being part of a community was helpful to me, because I don't know if I would have stuck with it past that point. I probably would have thought I'd finished. But because I was in an ashram and you weren't allowed to stop, you had to keep going. So we were doing 1 or 2 hours of practice every day, and sometimes a lot more, and a few retreats a year. So, and these things were mandatory, so you couldn't not do it. But what happens if you keep going with the practice is, at some point, sooner or later, you realize that the self, that deeper source, is actually all there is. And that is who you are. You realize, it suddenly dawns on you that you are always the source. And even when you are perceiving even when you are perceiving duality, that which is perceiving it is the source. There's literally no reason for you to do anything. There's no reason for you to do anything to experience non-duality, because this is non-dual. This reality is one. There's the appearance of many, but behind the appearance, there is just one. And this is the thing that when you encounter it, it's so shocking, because we're so deeply trained to see all of this in dualistic terms, that when you realize that it doesn't matter that it feels dualistic, it doesn't matter that it feels like many, it's ultimately all one. This is not a desk, a computer, a person, another person, a country. This is all consciousness. This is all experience. This is all pure experience. And the experience of duality is just as much an experience as the experience of non-duality. There's no difference. The only thing you've ever had is the only thing there ever has been is experience. There never was a person having the experience. There was just an experience of thinking there was a person having the experience. And when you fall down that rabbit hole, suddenly you realize this is just one unfolding experience of being. It's just oneness. And no matter what form it takes, it's still one unfolding experience of being. And the experience of that, or what that unleashes in you, is the most profound sort of rest. You suddenly relax completely, because you and this is why I speak about the practice of no problem, because suddenly you realize there never was a problem. There was never anything wrong. Non-duality had never been lost. And then it starts to get very funny. Then you go through, and Ramana speaks about this, you go through stages also of non-dual awareness. That's not that, because this realization that I'm speaking about is called Turiya, the fourth. It's the fourth consciousness. So there's the body, the physical consciousness. There's the causal. There's the physical. There's the subtle. There's the causal. So there's the physical, there's the body, the gross realm. There's the subtle, which is the emotional energetic realm. There's the causal, which is the deeper being. And then there's Turiya, which is the fourth, which is always, and which contains all the others. But then there's various stages of Turiyatita, which means beyond the fourth. And one keeps falling and falling and falling into deeper and deeper realization that all is one, that this is all one energetic unfolding occurring. And then you start to realize there never was a person having the experience. There was just the experience of imagining yourself as a person. And there was never any meditation happening. You start to realize everything is meditation. There is no, what's the difference between sitting on a cushion in meditation and walking around? There's no difference. It's all experience unfolding. And that's really when people, you start to wonder, why should I bother meditating anymore? And to me, I like to meditate. So I keep meditating because it's so much, it's so nice to have that time to let go. There's two reasons why I love to meditate. One is because it's the time when I can really just relax and be most aware of the non-dual nature of the ever unfolding experience of life. And also that state of total surrender is the perfect way for me to express my love for the divine, to show her that I trust her so much that I'm willing to just sit and be absolutely surrendered, give up all control, give myself to her. So then, I kind of, in meditation is my opportunity to experience both the wisdom of Jnani and the love of bhakti in the most conscious way. But of course, it's not necessary from a certain point of view. And this gets very interesting because you realize that there was never a problem. There was never anything wrong. You start to realize that non-duality was always the case. What you were pursuing was an experience of non-duality. And okay, so that's great. Having an experience of non-duality is great. But what's interesting is non-duality didn't need you to have an experience of it in order to be true. Just like if we want to use the terminology of God, we think God only, initially on the path, we think God only exists when we see her or him. But from God's point of view, it doesn't really matter if I see him or her. God is anyway. God always was. Non-duality is and always was. It doesn't need me to be aware of it. And yeah, so that's how I see, or how I have learned the progression from, at least in the way that Ramana teaches, going from practice to the attainment of habit, to the realization of the truth of non-duality.
Yes, I'm sorry, Jeff. There's a slight power outage over here. So that's the reason why I changed the stream.
I haven't been to India in a long time, but I remember that happens sometimes.
Yes.
So did you lose the last thing that I said?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. So I was just wrapping up saying that's how I understand Ramana's distinctions of moving from the phase of practice, where you're having to break the habit of duality, to attainment, where you've now developed the habit of the awareness always returning to the self, to realization, where you realize that non-duality was always the fact. And the fact that we didn't realize it didn't actually matter at all to anyone but us. Duality was fine before we realized. It's great that we do realize it, of course, but initially we think duality becomes the truth when we realize it. But that phase of realization is when you realize that duality was I mean, non-duality was always the truth. Whether we realize it or not becomes irrelevant. And I remember seeing that for myself once on retreat in this very profound way. I thought, this is always the way it was. Just because I thought it was different didn't make it different. And I realized that from one point of view, it doesn't really matter if I'm experiencing non-duality, because non-duality is anyway. And that's such a huge relief. You realize, the universe is okay. You know, it's not the universe isn't depending on me. Thank God, right? That the universe isn't depending on my realization. What a horrible state for the cosmos to be in. The whole thing is resting on Jeff's shoulders. That's very precarious. You realize the universe is fine. Existence is fine. It's always been fine. God always has been the source. And from that point on, I no longer needed experiences, spiritual experience. I got plenty. I continue to get plenty. I mean, if you're open, you get plenty of experiences. That's how this works. But I didn't need them, because I knew that she was fine. I knew that the universe was fine, whether I was aware of it or not. And so I was much freer to just live. And sometimes I'm needing to engage in the experience of duality and get things done. And sometimes I get to sit in meditation and experience the non-dual glory of the deeper being. And it's all fine. You know, there literally is no problem with any of it. So yes, that's how I was wrapping that part up.
Yes. That's so wonderful, Jeff. And would you like to tell us about your upcoming books that, you would like to, ask our audience to read,
Yes, well,
Yeah.
this one that we're speaking about is called The Miracle of Self-Realization. And it's about Ramana's teaching. It's a short book. It's available only as an ebook, and it's part of a series that I've been writing. This is actually 4 of them have been released, and there's more coming. And what I'm trying to do is in short,
Right.
easy to read bites, share some of the things that I find some of the most profound insights that I've had, and also some of my most profound influences. So Ramana Maharshi being one. The second book in that series is called The Miracle of an Open Mind, which is about the American mystic and psychologist William James. And I have other books planned in that series. And I've recently written a more major work called Higher Self-Expression, which is about the creative capacities that come alive in human beings as we open this channel to the source, right? The source of being, the oneness, the awareness that is the source of existence. As we open a channel to that, as we become a vehicle for that, profound capacities for creative expression start to become possible. And so that's what I'm exploring in that book. That one's recently come out. And I'm hoping that you and I will have a chance to talk about that sometime not too far from now. But in that book, I also mention Ramana to some extent, but I mention I mention a lot of my heroes in that book, my spiritual heroes. The 2 that come from the Hindu tradition are Ramana Maharshi, whose lineage I worked in, but also another of my heroes, which is Ramakrishna, who's the North Indian saint somewhat earlier than Ramana. And I find his story and his awakening to be very different than Ramana's in some ways, but equally fascinating and inspiring. So I write about Ramakrishna in that book, but in addition, I write about the Catholic monk Thomas Merton, who was a very early explorer of interfaith traditions, and I write about some of the writers and artists that have inspired me, just all as an exploration of the creative capacities of spirit. You know, it's not the creative capacities of human beings. It's the creative capacities of the human spirit that can come through an open-hearted and open-minded human being in profound ways. So that's some of the books that I have coming soon. Or actually, some of them are available, some are coming soon. Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, I would like to ask everyone, to suggest everyone to kindly read Jeff Carreira's books. Because they're so enlightening and so meaningful. Like each and every book is so meaningful, and they'll definitely give you some insight into yourself, your true self that we are looking for. So what he means to say is that nothing external is going to help us, but everything is about going within and finding your true self. And that is how you will definitely find yourself. And that is all you need. That is all anyone would need. So yes, my dear friends, if you want to have any information regarding Jeff Carreira, his website is www.jeffcarreira.com, my dear friends. You will find everything about him, his courses, his books, his work, everything is available over there. You can definitely go there and try to browse all the stuff. And his courses are amazing. It's definitely amazing, and I would recommend his course to be taken up by each and everyone, because they are life-changing. They have changed many persons and many people's lives, and I'm sure it will do to yours too. So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming over and letting us know about this beautiful book. And would you like to give our audience a final message before you wrap up?
Well, I love the message that you gave, so I will simply reiterate it, which is that a deep and penetrating look inside toward the source of our own self, the source of our own soul, if we do it with love and energy, will reveal everything that needs to be revealed about this magnificent journey of being an awakening human being. So that's how I would like to leave everyone today.
That is a lovely thing, because love is something that we all need, and love from within is far more precious than something which is shown towards external or coming from external forces. Love from within is the most precious one. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Jeff, for coming over and letting us know about your new book. And I want everyone to read this book, my dear friends. This is really nice, because Ramana Maharshi Ji is a great grand master, and this book gives us a glimpse of it. It's a short book, my dear friends. It's just 84 pages and about the miracle of self-realization, my dear friends. I would recommend and suggest everyone to read this book and to go and explore his website and find out what all courses that you can, join, or whatever interests you can join there. So with that, I would like to wrap up this session with Jeff Carreira, and I would love to see you again with another new session. And we need more masterclasses from you, Jeff, if you're willing to do that for us.
I'm very willing. Yes, I would love to.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I'm excited. We are going to have a masterclass by Jeff Carreira. Oh my God. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much for your lovely speech about this book. And your energy is very contagious. Like you're so positive, so radiant, and so high vibrational. Thank you so much for being you and giving us this gift, your books, and you are a gift to humanity. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. So that is today's program for today, and we will be meeting Jeff again next time. So be prepared with, to join on the masterclass by Jeff Carreira. So signing off, this is Parinitha Patri signing off. Thank you so much, everyone. Namaste. Thank you.